What up traders, what up investors, Ken here from Dyslexic Investor. We're going to be doing something slightly different today. We're going to be looking at the NASDAQ 100. Again, this is a composite of a multitude of different stocks. We're actually a total of 103 different various equity stocks. That's due to like Google kind of splitting and making two different companies and those kind of markers. But it's just basically making a correlation of 100 most highly driven stocks within the NASDAQ. So the overall NASDAQ contains, I think, around 3,400 stocks. So this is basically the best of the best within that particular section. That being said, so we're going to be covering everything from Apple to Zoom. That's again starting with alphabetical order. We're going to be looking here at Apple first, and then we'll just go all the way through looking at support resistance lines and Fibonacci time markers or particular time targets varies as well. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into Apple here. Of course, Apple just hit $2 trillion, looking for that upward pressure to kind of come in around 471, potentially downside support. In the short term is going to be coming around the 8 EMA, which is on 455, and then more the level 2 stronger support down to the lower prices around 430. Again, these are the prices pre the split that's coming towards the end of the month. Next stock is going to be Adobe. Adobe has been performing very well with the overall pandemic, but the last couple weeks we've kind of seen it trade sideways here, kind of in this box here, kind of made this make-believe fish box. Looking at here potentially to see a breakout to get above that 465 to kind of potentially test the 470 previous high, and even to the downside looking for that initial support between the 21 and 34. That's going to be in the range around the 447, so 447 down to around the 442. And if we start breaking below that, really getting up below that 430 price target, we could be seeing some damage take place and really see some significant lower prices. Next one is going to be ADI. This thing has just had earnings. You can kind of see this right off the bat from this Fibonacci retracements from the previous swing high to low. We're seeing basically some overhead resistance around the 118.90 cents marker here. That's again that 50% retracements from the previous swing high to low. Looking for this to kind of potentially keep things down. But if this momentum down here, the squeeze, could fire long with a lot of that momentum building up after earnings, we could see that prices start breaking out to above the 120 price target. If it fails and we start seeing the 5 and 8 moving averages cross through the 21 and potentially past the 55 EMA, we could see some prices below the 114, 115. Next one is ADP. This one has been kind of really beaten up and been a little bit lackluster and kind of behind the overall trend. You can kind of see that with being well below the 200 EMA here. The 5 and 8 have not substantially crossed through the 21 with any amount of momentum to upkeep. You can kind of see it kind of passed here to try to keep things up and running, but it really kind of failed and came right back down pretty substantially. Really want to see that 5 and 8 moving average cross to the 21 to the upside. To the downside, this can continue, potentially trying to build a base here to kind of get that momentum to kind of start getting above that 150 price target. To the downside, we're really going to see those parabolic SARs kind of coming in support around the 130. Next one is Autodesk. That's ADSK. This is a very interesting pattern here. You kind of see this kind of building a base here, kind of letting the moving averages kind of catch up the last couple weeks and just really building this really strong potential, we call it a box method, just kind of in this trading range here. Potentially with a squeeze coming out and with a huge flag on earnings. Again, earnings, a complete coin flip. If you haven't traded earnings before, especially with options, it can be really, really risky. Again, just really trading in this pattern, looking for a potential breakout to get above that 250 price target to kind of start breaking out to get out of this box. To the downside, we're really going to be looking for some support around the $230 price target, potentially even lower if the earnings are great. But the squeeze has a lot of momentum. This rubber band has been stretching and being wound up quite a bit to kind of see on which way it could break. This thing looks pretty substantial and ripe for a potential large move. Next one is ALGN. Again, this thing has been performing well as well. Looking here to kind of hold that 21 EMA all the way up. Since it already had earnings, kind of came back down. Again, kind of consolidated around that 21 EMA down to the 34 for some support, and just kind of consolidating here. We have a one-day squeeze set up, nothing too significant. Looking to kind of see this kind of hold the trend, potentially level support around the 295, potentially even down to 291, be initial stronger support. To the upside, we really want to see it above the 320 price target to kind of test those previous highs. Next one is ALXN. This thing has kind of been slightly beaten down from its last earnings report. You can kind of see here this downward momentum. The 5 and 8 moving averages have not been able to try to catch a break here to potentially try to break above this 21. You see all the candles really failing here at the 21, so this is a significant sign of downward pressure. You kind of see that with the parabolic purple dots here as well, kind of just keeping it down below. So this has been looking for some potential further downward pressure. If it starts breaking below the 101 price target, we could see some significant downside. To the upside, we really need to see this the 5 and 8 cross through the 21 and seeing those candles really start closing above the 21 EMA. Next one is AMAT, Applied Materials. This one has been performing very well here on a beautiful looking chart. Really just coming down to the 21 and 34 for great buying opportunities on this one multiple times throughout the past couple months. Kind of seeing this consolidation here after earnings. It got a little exhausted, maybe some weak hands, kind of coming back down. Nothing too bearish here. Looking for potential support around the 21 into the 34 and potentially kind of slowly riding this trend higher here. One of the fan favorites, we got AMD here. This thing has been fantastic. Since the pandemic, it was in a very tight range, finally broke out of that range again above that $60 price target, and it just went skyrocketing higher. Looking for some consolidation here because it had a large move higher. Looking for that consolidation to continue, potentially waiting for the 21 and 34 EMAs to kind of catch up to potentially build another long strenuous base to kind of test that $95 upward momentum. Again, downward support's really going to be coming in around 76, 75, and then around the 73 price target there, so be mindful of that. AMGN, this is another great little ticker here. We kind of see here kind of a potentially building a base here. You see the 5 and 8 have kind of cut through that 21 EMA pretty substantially and through the 34, through the 50. Now kind of building a base, letting things kind of catch up. The parabolic SARs are very much on top of it, so any kind of strong upward force momentum in the stock would really change its projection. It could really climb it substantially higher. Looking for this would be a great little Fibonacci retracement here, so we can do that here from the previous swing high to low. If it clicks, there we go. Looking for that potential price target to really break above that 246, potentially start getting above that 250, and then start seeing the climb higher. Downward support's really going to be coming into that low that we saw around 234, and then potentially even down if it really starts to get to selling and it wants to have a fire sale. Be looking around the 200 EMA, which would be around currently around the 227 price target. We've kind of seen that bounce off there before. Next one, of course, another fan favorite is Amazon, AMZN. Whew, this one's been hot for sure. From the previous swing high to low, we kind of made a magical trend line here, aka the 21 EMA. It's been holding this pattern very well. Really cut through the 78.6 percentile move. That's again around the 32.46 price target. Looking this to kind of carry it higher, potentially test all-time highs. As of right now, we have not broken the S&P 500 all-time status. We are super close here, so there's a lot of stocks really moving around that potential price target or potential pullback. If Amazon can really break through the previous high, we're looking for that price target around $34.67, so $3,467. That is a substantially large price target, but again, Amazon has been a large leader in basically taking a lot of market share from a lot of companies. Really downward support, we're looking at around the 31.69, even down to the 31.42 for initial support, and then after that we're going to be kind of coming into the 34 EMA, which we've kind of seen it tap here before, which is around the 3,062. Another one which I haven't traded before is ANSS, and this is a beautiful looking chart again, really holding that 2134 EMA, kind of coming slightly through that with some more momentum, kind of hitting that 55, which is the white line here. That's a 55 EMA, and the red is the 50 simple, and kind of been holding that trend line going substantially higher, hitting an all-time high just today, looking for a potential pullback to the 21 or 34, which would be around 310 down to the 305 target, looking forward to potentially going higher. We can kind of give a potential overhead sign of resistance again from the previous swing high to the low that I'm trying to click here. Next overhead target would be around 325 to the upside, and then it would be 360 from that next target from that previous swing high to low. Asml, again, another little fantastic stock I've not traded before. This thing looks pretty interesting here from the previous swing high to previous swing low. Really failed here hard once here at the 1618 here. It's going to be around the 382 price target. Failed here just 2 days ago, and kind of consolidating here potentially around the 50% retracement. We're looking around the 375, basically creating a strong base, kind of seeing if momentum or something can drive through. The only factor here is volumes kind of drying up here, and would like to see this potentially downward support kind of coming in around the 363. Activision Blizzard kind of had a great quarter, but they kind of sold off pretty substantially here at a high of 87.73. Looking for some fibs here from the previous swing high to the previous swing low, looking to kind of see if it starts breaking above 84.32. That could be a nice little movement for potentially to propel it higher to get to that $87 price target. But we're seeing some overhead resistance here at the 50% retracement. Of course, that's going to be around the 83.30 price target. Looking for that again. Looks like it wants to kind of build a base, but again, stocks have a mind of its own. I'm not going to try to predict where it can go. I just let it go, and then I make my trades accordingly to that price. AVGO, this thing has been fairly flat here again, coming back well like a V-shaped bottom here from the pandemic, hitting an all-time high just the previous week, kind of just holding this steady eddy pattern here. With earnings on the horizon, we could see an earnings run kind of come into play, but momentum's fairly strong. The only concern is that volume slightly drying up here. Potentially downside support is going to be coming around the 323, where the parabolic SAR in the 21 EMA line up, and potentially significantly breaking out to kind of get above that 335. Jumping to the Bs, we have Baidu, that's BIDU. This thing kind of has been beaten up from the previous swing high to previous swing low. You kind of see here it's kind of been hitting these Fibonacci numbers. You see that 618 kind of come in around that $120 price target, kind of build a base, had some good news, kind of popped up to the 78 percentile move, kind of failed there at the 133, then came back down to the 122, and now kind of consolidating here. Had some support come in from the 200 EMA. Looking for this one to potentially just trade sideways again with earnings just announced. Looking for this potentially to hold, potentially build a base, and then have to kind of project what the movement is in the next couple of weeks or a couple of days to see if we want to start potentially go to back to the 133 or come back down to the 200 EMA or to the 115. Next one is Biogen. This is BIIB. This thing has been beaten up substantially here. Again, with a lot of pharmaceutical stocks that are very much driven on test, whatever the clinical trials come out, all that kind of stuff. So these most pharmaceutical companies, you see really strong spikes up, spikes down. They're not usually the most prettiest patterns to trade. But once they may spike up, spike down, you really can see potentially some Fibonacci retracements come in. So you really see this here on this particular one. You see that really come in precisely from this previous swing high to low, really hitting some overhead resistance at 350. Kind of trading lower here, potentially trading lower, breaking below the 200 EMA. Now kind of hugging and potentially building a base here around the 285. This pattern, again, not a big fan of pharmaceutical companies, but this looks like it wants to potentially build a base here. But if the 5 and 8 start crossing through the 21, we could potentially see some lower prices below the 275. Next one is Booking Holdings. It's BKNG. Of course, with traveling kind of halted, and it's been a very tough stock to try to make money in, but it looks like the company's on the overall stock price has been performing fairly well since the pandemic. That being said, we can kind of see that really clearly here on the Fibonacci retracements. You see that 200 EMA really come in for potential support and resistance. Again, really falling in where that 618 is also, that's around the 1714, so $1,700 is price target for initial support. Overhead resistance really going to come in around 1880. Kind of see here previously, kind of bounce off that, kind of almost got up there, but it failed again. Looking for this potentially to go long, you need to see that above the 1880. To the downside, we're really seeing that support around 1700 and potentially even lower to around the $1,600 price target. Bmrn, this is again, looks like it is a pharmaceutical company. This is what we're talking about. Some bad news came out and it just jolted down. This is something that I do not want to be catching a falling knife with acid on it. This is a very too much of a crazy play here. We're kind of seeing here potentially it could bottom here around the $70 price target. But that being said, we can do an interesting Fibonacci retracements from the previous swing high to the low here. We could potentially see it failed here at the 1618, which would be around $85. Again, not sure exactly what happened here. I don't follow this company at all, but looking for that initial target around 85, and then potentially looking for $80 there as well from the previous low, and even down to $70. Projecting at the 2618 could even get down to $56. So this is something that has been severely damaged, and just wouldn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Jumping to the C's, we got CDNS. I've never traded this stock before, but this is a gorgeous looking stock here, holding that 21 EMA so very well. Really looking for that consistency to continue to play out, looking for that 21 EMA to kind of help this one continue to guide higher. Some warning signs would again be that the 5 and 8 exponential moving average crossing through the 21 and seeing some potential further downward pressure. The only thing is, as well, we're seeing a little bit of drying up of volume down here as well. CDW, basically been at a very significantly base here. We can kind of do a Fibonacci retracement again. This is what's perfect from the previous swing high to the previous swing low. Really failing hard at the 118.32 price target, aka the 61.8 percentile move from the previous swing high to the previous swing low, having significant amount of pressure up here, potentially some support here around the 109 to 110. Again, looking for this, really just kind of carve this out as a box method here and seeing how this plays out. Again, upside needs to break above that, downside needs to break down there. So the next level, if it wants to go up, be 130, downside would be 100. Very simple as a dimple. CERN, again, very much a box method as well. This looks like it wants to be pounding on the door here, looking for that potential pattern. That 200 EMA has come down for some support here, kind of cutting through it with some more vigorous movement, but that pattern looks fairly well tradable in this range here. Just be mindful, starts breaking and closing above those price targets, we could potentially see some significant higher prices, so we can kind of project those out on potential guidelines going forth, looking for above 75 to potentially see some higher prices. To the downside, really looking for some support around 70 down to $69. Next one is Chkp. This thing looks like it's performed very well since its last earnings. In another squeeze, a lot of momentum coming in here, really holding that 21 EMA. It has some volume coming in, same with RSI and volume zone oscillator. But this one looks interesting as well to kind of do a little bit more of a short-term time frame from the previous swing high to the previous swing low. We're seeing some overhead resistance at 128. It needs to break above that to potentially get and test above that previous high. To the downside, we're really going to be looking for some support around that 21 EMA. Kind of lines up with a lot of these other candles here, be around the 123 price target. We've got Charter Communications, CHTR. This thing has been completely gangbusters. Really just riding higher with, again, that overall momentum of staying at home and all that various stuff, the fun stuff to go with that. Hitting an all-time high just today at $616. Whew, baby. we can do a Fibonacci retracement to kind of see some potential next overhead of resistance. We're going to be looking at the 1618, which comes around the 657. This is not a Tesla, this is not an Amazon or even an Apple, where this is going to just get jolt up like that. This thing just is a slow, easy, steady eddy, looking for potential support again around that 590 to the downside. Comcast, love them, hate them, whatever. Looking at the stock here, looking for this potential movement here from the previous swing high to the previous swing low, seeing some potential resistance at the 78.6 percentile move, which is around $44.30. Next, going to be your overhead sign of resistance to the downside, really going to be coming in around the $41 level, low slightly below the 34 EMA, because we've kind of seen this kind of where a potential breakout or breakdown, so that's a significant level there. We do have a squeeze in place, and RSI is fairly strong in volume zone as well, but again, we need to see some more volume come in here to kind of see this potentially break above that $44 price target. That being said, if the 5 and 8 moving averages start crossing through the 21, we could be seeing that $41 price target to even lower. Costco, one of my favorite stores to go to. This thing has been a complete beast since the pandemic. Really very much clear here on those Fibonacci retracements from the previous swing high to the previous swing low, and I just messed that up. There we go. You can kind of see here with that momentum from the previous swing high to previous swing low, really having that initial support around the 313, not being able to get above that. The third, fourth, fifth time's a charm, broke through it, hit the next level of the previous high, built a strong base. Guess what? Popped through that. Now building another base, potentially building a base here to potentially start building our way to the 358 price target. To the downside, the 21 and 34 have been really strong support on that one. Cprt, another great stock which I've never actually traded before, and I don't quite know what it is. From the previous swing high, previous swing low, nothing really too standing out. It's just looking like we have a questionable earnings coming out in the beginning of September. Really strong momentum on the 5 and 8 moving averages, so anything that trades on the daily side between the 5 and 8 moving averages is really very much momentum driven. Since volume's been fairly flat here, this looks like a potential FOMO run into earnings. The really next overhead sign of resistance is going to be around the previous high, which is going to be around the 408.88, 404.88 on that previous high, and then downward support is really going to be coming to the 21, which will be around 96, and then that initial 78.6 percentile move, which is around $94. Cisco, what do I got to say about these guys? Not so great quarter, didn't do very well at all. Really broke through the overall 200 EMA, which we thought could hold around 45. Broke through that, now looking for that 50% retracements from the previous swing high to kind of potentially build a base. These moving averages are dropping like rocks. They need to start curling and start looking to be more parallel to these lines instead of just being straight up and down compared to these lines. Looking to kind of see this kind of start consolidating here around $42. If this doesn't consolidate and we see some more negative news, we could come easily back down to 40, and then of course 40 down to 37. To the upside, we really need to see this kind of potentially build a base and get above that $44 price target. Csgp, this thing has a little great quarter here, popped up, kind of consolidated in between the 1618 and the 1272, really building a strong base here, potentially consolidating for another potential move. Again, that next overhead sign of resistance is going to be around $900 to the downside. We're looking for some support around 803. CSX, love the trains, choo-choo. Looking here at this one, again, really large component in the overall economy. Really seeing a nice little interesting pattern here. That 200 EMA has been significantly signs of support, so that's going to be very strong on looking for that. And then the 73.38 is another sign for potential support in the short term. To kind of see this pattern hold here, really need to start seeing it above 76 to potentially test that all-time high of $80. Now we have CTAS. Of course, this has been doing very well here, holding that 21 EMA and just continue climbing higher. Looking for some potential overhead resistance once I get these Fibonacci numbers for you. Next overhead line of resistance is going to be around 345, and then support is going to be down from its previous high, and where the 21 lines up with around 304. CTSH, we're another interesting stock here. Really interesting pattern here. Not my favorite kind of pattern to be looking at, but looking at this from the previous swing high to previous swing low, we kind of see this huge movement higher on earnings and then consolidation. Normally this consolidation means it's a good thing if it's not going down, if you're long, of course, depending on what side of the trade you're on. Initial support around 64. Next overhead sign is that previous high around 71. CTXS, so Citrix Systems. This thing looks like it wants to potentially reverse and make a new change here, because you can see that with the substantial downside between that 5 and 8 exponential moving average kind of crossing through here and now trying to curl up, building somewhat of a base here with that parabolic SAR just switching, and we really want to see that 5 and 8 cross through the 21 and start seeing these green candles closing above the 21 EMA. We do have a squeeze. Volume zone oscillators looking great. Well, the sense of going positive, that's a great sign for potentially seeing this kind of maybe potentially moving higher. Some lines of resistance again be around 144.38 and then potentially up to 150. Down to the D's, we got DLTR. This thing has been Dollar Tree. Of course, this thing has been performing well and then not so well, kind of with the overall economy. We're kind of seeing here at the 1618 kind of coming in around $96.98, being some initial previous overhead resistance, now being kind of coming some downside support where the 21 and 34 potentially start crossing through it. So that's significant. Potentially next level of overhead resistance would be around 106. DocU, this one has been absolutely fire. Don't get me started next time on story time. I'll tell you the story, which if you haven't heard before, I bought this sucker, basically a lot of shares around 73, and I sold it at $90-ish, and I thought I was the smartest person in the world. Of course, I didn't see this coming. Substantially amount of money lost, but it's, you live and you learn, right? So with this one had pretty much of a run-up due to the work-from-home pandemic stocks, really holding that 21.34 EMA. Great little buying opportunity here. Looking for this to potentially start breaking above that $215 to $213 to potentially go higher. We can do a very short-term Fibonacci retracement here for you. From the previous swing high to previous swing low, that basically comes in around that 214, which is that 618. Really need to see that pattern start breaking above that to hit that 220. Downside support that we talked about is anywhere from the 204 to the 200 there. DXCM, again, another trading stock using that 21 and 34 previously. Really been really strong momentum to continue to grind higher. Really use that 34 and 21 there for that momentum. EA has been performing very well as well with a lot of the stay-at-home Activision and video game stocks. That 21 and 34 again has been substantial here for potential buying opportunities. If you start seeing that 5 and 8 cross through the 21, which we haven't seen for months literally, that would be your sign to potentially further downside. eBay is a very interesting one here, potentially trying to break out here above that 58.26 level. We're seeing some momentum, RSI and volume zone oscillator start building up. Really can potentially see that movement to kind of break above that 58 price target to get above that $60 and then potentially test that all-time high. To the downside, we can potentially see some support coming around the 34 EMA around 55. Next one is EXC, which I've never traded in my life before, but this thing looks not so great if you're going to be a bull on it, with a 200 EMA really just failing here multiple times. 5 and 8 crossing through this, so we can kind of do a potential further projections here. Yeah, it looks like potentially it wants to head down to 34 if this doesn't build a strong base here around 37, and those 5 and 8 moving averages start driving it lower with the push down from the parabolic SAR. This thing is not looking very pretty to the long side. EXPE, again, same as well. This thing is really knocking on the door here at the 200 EMA, potentially trying to break above that $90 price target. We can kind of do a quick fib here. That's basically the previous swing high to low. That's the 50% retracement there. Again, 50% retracement, 200 EMA, that is a significant amount of overhead resistance, around $90. But if we get above that $90, I think this thing could really run up to 102 to even to 120. To the downside, really looking for some support around the $78 price target. Fast, this is not Fastly, this is Fast, F-A-S-T. This thing has been performing extremely well here. I have no idea what this does, but this has been holding that 2134 pattern very well here. Really consolidating up here, potentially seeing a potential taking a break. The only concern would be to the downside if we start seeing the 5 and 8 moving averages start crossing to the 21 and we start seeing some heavy downward candle movement. Facebook, what do we say about Facebook? With a great earnings, had a great earnings surprise, really ramped up, breaking above that 250 price target, 248. Kind of using that as some consolidation, then getting another drive higher, hitting that overhead wall of resistance at the $278. Now kind of coming back, consolidating, potentially trying to get above that 278 and close above that. Again, downside support around 248. FISV, this is another interesting stock here. Really with that 200 EMA, we have a pretty strong squeeze building up here. With earnings behind us, this is a pretty substantial move, looking forward to kind of start breaking above that 200 EMA. So we can kind of look at the Fibonacci retracement for this guy. Looking for really to break above 105 for potentially some higher prices above 115. Downside support's really going to be coming in around 100. Fox Corp, of course, this is another stock here that's been kind of beaten up since the pandemic. You kind of see that well below the 200 EMA here as well. Looking again, kind of failing here at the $30 price target, but with that 200 EMA continuously going lower from that previous move there. We do have a squeeze setting up, potentially trying to break out. We've seen this movement before where the 5 and 8 try to get above the 200 or the 21 EMA to kind of start breaking out, but then fails. Really looking to see if they start breaking above potentially the $26 to $27 price target if it really wants to get up the move. Potential downside support is going to be coming around 24 to 25. And this is the same kind of analysis. This is the split or the acquisition thing. Gilead Sciences. This is GILD. Of course, this anything with it's so difficult to trade these stocks, guys. These pharmaceutical stocks can really get beaten up here. This thing has been really underperforming the market again. Really failing here, not being able to break above the 21 EMA. Failing pretty hard today, nearly down 5%. We can kind of give a potential move here to the downside. It's going to be very difficult. Again, these pharmaceutical companies are very tough to sometimes evaluate. That initial support was around $67.77. Looking for some potential downside support around 65. Really would love to see that back up to $70 there. Google, this is GOOG, another stock that's been, I wouldn't say it's been doing fantastic, but it's been performing fairly well compared to other companies. But out of the tech section, it has been kind of lacking. Hitting an all-time high at 1786. Now kind of building a potential base here. Now trying to potentially pull higher. Initial downside support around the 34 EMA, which is around $1,500. Looking for this squeeze and potential some more momentum coming in to kind of test that $1,670 price target there. The same thing with this particular GOOGL again. IDXX. This is a pretty stock if you've ever seen it. This thing is just a steady eddy, holding that 2134 EMA, just continue grinding higher. Potentially seeing a slowdown here and resting here with that move here sideways. Potentially, again, downward support's really looking around 365. Overhead, we're really looking to start seeing above that $400 price target. ILMN as well, of course. On earnings, didn't do very well, kind of came back down. Initial support kind of coming in around 340, kind of building a base here, trying to go higher. We are seeing the 5 and 8 moving averages to start performing a little bit better here. Again, we're talking about start being a little bit more parallel to the other lines here that we see. not being a very sharp plane crash down. Looking for these to kind of consolidate, potentially build a base to kind of start potentially get above that 21 EMA, which is currently at 366. Downward, it's going to be initially around the 340, and then potentially downside support around 330, where the 200 EMA comes in. Next one is INCY. Has been performing a little bit lackluster as well. Not 100% sure what this company does, but kind of a zigzag pattern. Not my favorite pattern to kind of diagnose here, but we're kind of seeing this pattern to kind of potentially bounce off this 200 EMA here, but not seeing it break above the 21 EMA, and the 5 and 8 need to start curling higher to really get that momentum to break higher to get above that. Again, downsides are going to be basically around 93 and then really strong at 91. Intel, one that it's been hitting up my DMs a lot of people saying this is a buying opportunity. For long term, maybe. I'm more of an AMD kind of guy, but with that horrible quarter, really just dropping the ball, lack of better words, coming all the way down to the $50 price target, which is the 618 from the retracements that we talked about from the Fibonacci, from the swing high to low to high. Really looking for potentially building a base around $50, waiting for these moving averages to kind of stop curling down and seeing a potential strong base and getting that momentum higher to get above that $50 to potentially to 52. Downside is basically 49 all the way down to 45 to see initial further damage to the downside. Next one is INTU. This has been another great little stock, but it's been a nice steady eddy. Like, it's nothing that's to write home and say this is going to be like a Wall Street bet stock. Really hitting some support here around 304 to the downside. Looking for that initial target with that momentum. With earnings on the horizon, again, be super mindful of that. That could be, especially with options, be very careful with that. I would be putting out a full position into earnings without a doubt. Looking for potential overhead. Significant overhead resistance around 336. ISRG, another great stock here I love, and I've been actually holding some shares in this for quite some time. Really had a fantastic quarter, huge movement higher, now consolidating. Would love to see this potentially even go higher. So what we're looking at here, I can kind of give you the little 411 here. Here, please, like, might need a new mouse. Really building that base here around the $688, give plus or minus $3 or $4, looking for that potential building that base, waiting to consolidate, seeing that squeeze set up to potentially test that $778 there. So this is a nice little move potentially to the upside. Downside support's really going to come in around the 34, but again, being somewhat of a, not a pharmaceutical stock, but a medical stock, we could see, if they do post bad numbers, we could see significant drop coming down to, even down to the 200 EMA, which is around 577. JD, whew, this thing's been fire. Really holding that 200 or 21 EMA, kind of consolidating in this pattern here. Really just kind of trading sideways here, waiting for earnings to come out. We had that squeeze set up, a lot of volume coming in, and just now rocketing higher substantially here. We can do a previous swing high to previous swing low here. Looking for that movement to potentially hit $75 to the upside. Looking at some overhead resistance initially at 72, potentially downside support really kind of coming in initially at 67 and then potentially down to 64. KHC, Kraft Heinz. I don't know why you would buy this, but it's been a nice steady eddy here, kind of recovering from its, I think it had financial accounting issues. Now kind of somewhat coming back here, looking for this pattern to continue, hitting an all-time high just this past Monday, and just kind of slowly trading higher with an earnings report that was okay, kind of rebounded, and now just continue trying to hold that 21 and 34 to go higher. KLAC has been performing pretty well here as well. Again, really holding that 21.34 and just continued grinding higher. Had a pretty okay quarter, but it came down to that 21.34. Not the most prettiest pattern, but it is a trend pattern without a doubt. LBTYA, yeah, that's been interesting. This is basically just building in a box here, looking for a potential movement. With earnings kind of went down, we're seeing a little bit of less volume coming here. Looking for initial support around $22 because that 200 EMA has been fairly strong here to the downside. Looking at some fibs here, we kind of see this. I bet you it's going to line up around the 50% retracement. So that's, yeah, the 50% retracement is basically where the 200 EMA comes in, and the overhead pressure is coming around 23. So really need to see some significant movement either direction going higher, so above 23.34, or to the downside around 21.50 and below. Another long ticker, LBTYK, basically same pattern, same company. LRCK, Land Research. Of course, this has been, again, semiconductors have been performing very well thanks to AMD and a lot of those various components, not Intel. With the really strong pattern from the pandemic of building this base, had a huge run higher, potentially trying to consolidate here, had a great earnings here, really lifted the stock higher, but now kind of just trading sideways, kind of waiting for these moving averages to kind of catch up potentially to see what the next overhead pressure could be. Want to do a Fibonacci retracement from the previous swing high to previous swing low. We can kind of see that the 1272 came in as a price target. So that needs to break above the 387 here, really to see the next upside movement up to $444 would be the next line in the sand. But this is a very steady eddy process, so anything around the 21 to 34 could be a potential adding or starting of a position. Lulu, got to get those yoga pants. You kind of see here this previous pattern we talked about. It was in a box, really holding that 21 EMA and 34. Really broke through that box beautifully and just continued climbing higher. Really looking for this pattern to continue, most likely into earnings for a nice earnings run. Marriott, I was thinking Marymount University. Going from this previous swing high to previous swing low. Not the most prettiest pattern, but it's kind of potentially making a comeback. If you want to make a longer term bet, we're looking for some consolidation around 87 potentially. Really would love to see it above the 200 EMA around 102 to potentially see those 112 prices. MCHP, another stock that's kind of been in the same kind of a box method. With earnings kind of dropped on it, but now kind of making somewhat of a strong comeback, but it's not breaking out of this box here. It really needs to get above that 110 to potentially test that 113 to 115 price target, and same to the downside. If it starts getting below the $100 price target, we could be seeing some prices to around 95. MDLZ, another stock that's kind of been just trading sideways but performing okay the last couple weeks. Really hitting some overhead pressure on the 55, now kind of saying goodbye to it. Potentially if it can hold above the 55.94, seeing some potential targets to get of that previous high. To the downside is going to be initially kind of coming in around that $55 price target, and then all the way down to potentially to 52 potentially. That's where the 200 EMA comes in there. And this one has been completely gangbusters. This is MELI. This has been a really great performer, really breaking through these moving averages and just really continues grinding higher. Really looking for this pattern to start consolidating and even start going higher to get above that basically $1,300 price target that we have in mind here, and seeing this pattern really work its way out. To the downside, really looking for some buying opportunities between the 21 and 34 EMAs. If it does decide to come down, you can kind of see here we had some initial support around the 963 there. Again, that's pretty substantially where we are currently from, but anything can happen, right? This is Monster Energy beverage. Again, this thing has been I've never had them. I think I've had a Monster once or twice. It didn't taste good to me. It wasn't my taste buds. I just love coffee. Looking for that movement, really hitting that imaginary line of $84 basically here, not being able to get above that particular price target. Looking for some consolidation. If we can get some really tight consolidation and stronger momentum to really push this through to get above that $85. To the downside, we're really going to see some support coming in around 80 and even down to 77.50. Microsoft, of course, Microsoft might be buying TikTok sometime in September. They have, and blah, blah, blah. What this one is a very interesting short-term trade that we're looking at is basically to kind of see it break above that 212. But we really need to see momentum start picking up and really driving this higher to start getting above that 217 to even 215 price target. To the downside, we're really looking for some support around the 206 to even $200 for potential downside support. MU, whew, this one's been a daisy. I know Ryan and I, who's the guy that's in our fantastic dyslexic investor Discord, really did not perform very well on earnings. Again, thanks to most likely Intel and those kind of factors. That again, with also Western Digital didn't do very well. Really just drove this price lower. You saw that movement again. We had that box in place, broke through that box. Really substantial. Those 5 and 8 moving averages are still slow at point in the ground. Potentially some resistance around 42.75 if it wants to come down to that level. But this is not a stock that I would love to just jump into all with hands and knees. We have Mxim. Nice little steady eddy here. Movement higher on some news. Potentially just trading sideways here, waiting for some moving averages to kind of catch up, looking for some potential consolidation here. Want to start seeing it above the $70 price target to the downside. We're looking for support around 67. Netflix, NFLX, of course, another great ticker. If you have a fantastic Netflix show you want me to watch or check out, please put that in the comments section down below. I would love to hear what your recommendations for me would be. That being said, it had a huge earnings run. I think this is one of the cases I always talk about of just having these overblown expectations like Tesla did into earnings. Fantastic quarter, but the stock moved so much into earnings, it just had a drop. And ever since then, it's kind of been very damaged here around the 21 and 34 EMA. Potentially looking for another break here. Since the parabolic SAR has really just driving this lower, we really want to see this strong move higher here and seeing the 5 and 8 cross through the 21 and really start breaking this through and getting above that 511 price target. Netapp is NTAP. This thing has been very lackluster coming into earnings just on the 26th. This looks like a very underperforming stock. Looking at the 200 EMA, looking for potential downside to break below 40. Upside really needs to start breaking above 45 to kind of see that stock movement there. So, but again, earnings on the horizon, be very mindful of that. NTES, this is a great looking stock, honestly, with holding that 5 and 8 moving averages and the 21 coming down to the 34 for some potential buying opportunities and just continue to grind higher here. The great looking stock there. Nvidia, one that's everyone's kind of watching on with earnings coming out just today, looking for potential price targets to break above 500 to really see that momentum to break above 500 to get to the 563 potentially. To the downside, really looking for some support around the 442 and even lower to around 430. Is that Nxpi? This is another semiconductor, kind of a steady eddy here, performing a little bit better than like the other semiconductors, but we're looking some resistance around 122. This can hold here. We start seeing the 21 cross above that. We're looking to the previous high around 140. Downside again is going to be coming in basically around the 115 to 116 support. All the way to the O's, we got O'Reilly Automotive, ORLY. This thing has been, it's an interesting stock. I don't know too much about cars and car parts, but it's been a nice, easy, steady eddy here as well. Coming down to the 34 multiple times for buying opportunities, having a great quarter, but then kind of giving that back. But again, it didn't give it back in a negative sense where it broke below the 21 and then continue going lower where it was previously to the earnings, rebounded off the 21 and now going higher. So I like this pattern, looking for some potential support around the 460 down to 450. To potentially start seeing some price targets above the 483. We've got Paychex, PAYX. Really interesting pattern here, really looking for that 200 EMA to potentially even hold this down. We're seeing a squeeze setting up here. We have RSI somewhat flat, volumes on oscillator as well, slightly flat here. Looking for that momentum to try to break above 75. If it can't, we're looking for basically prices below 71 to $70 if it can't make that momentum to go higher. PCAR, so PCAR, another interesting stock here, looking here, basically looking at that 5 and 8 moving averages kind of hold this pattern here, support basically to the 21 here around 86. Really looking for this potentially consolidate. No earnings or anything on the horizon, just kind of consolidating, being a nice steady eddy, potentially waiting for the next move. PepsiCo, PEP, another really interesting pattern here, looking for that really tight consolidation, and you can see here the squeeze has been on for months. So there's something building up here at PepsiCo. Doesn't mean it has to go higher, lower, or anything like that. We've seen these squeezes before within PepsiCo, which has been fairly strong here. And of course, when you see that squeeze pop, you saw a movement to the downside here. To this last squeeze, we saw pretty significant here again. We're not talking about a Tesla. We're not talking about an Apple here. We're talking about PepsiCo sells soda, waters, and chips and snacks. Unless they can find a way that I can get my new iPhone while I'm eating potato chips, that would be super interesting. But this one is a good case study, honestly, and good one for everyone to kind of look at the amount of patience it takes sometimes for patterns to play out. It's really looking at some overhead resistance around the 137, getting above it a couple times but never breaking through it. Downside support's really kind of come around 130, so that's basically your range that you're looking at here. Looking like it wants to fire higher, but that doesn't mean it needs to happen to that. But looking if it does, we're looking to 147, the initial price target previously of its all-time high, and then to the downside looking for that 50% retracement around 124. PayPal, this one has been hotter than a hamburger on a bun. That being said, that was terrible, kid. Got to place that, take that out. With this one, we're holding that 21 EMA very well here, potentially buying opportunities to the 34, kind of consolidating here. I wouldn't say running out of steam, but this thing has been moving substantially, so it's a very interesting one to watch. Speaking of steam and just performing super well, we're talking about Qualcomm here. Wow, this thing has been fantastic. Huge earnings, jumping up on earnings, multiple deviations. I think it's a 2 deviation move. Still holding that 5 and 8 moving pattern here between the 5 and 8 exponential moving average. Looking for some downside support around the 106, potentially if it wants to come down. Really looking for this consolidate, potentially start breaking above that 115 price target. Another pharmaceutical stock, REGN. Regeneron, basically performing better than ones we just previously looked at, like Gilead and other companies like that. Looking for this pattern to continue. Again, not a fan of any pharmaceutical stocks. This pattern doesn't look anything great to me. This just kind of looks consolidation, but again, a coin can flip, a ball can drop, something can break a glass or a vial, and it can just come crashing down. This is not usually my favorite kind of stocks to look at. Again, really just it kind of has a somewhat of a K pattern, really kind of coming down to that 50 simple moving average, which is the red line. But now we're seeing some really tight consolidation here, potentially trying to break above that $650 to potentially see that all-time high, or it can completely break down and get well below the $600 and get above to come down all the way to the 200. I don't know. This is something I would not like to be traded. It's going to be very hard to. Again, it's a pharmaceutical company. Rostor, R-O-S-T, almost there, guys. We're almost to the end. This thing, again, somewhat beaten up, being in the retail space here from the previous swing high to the previous swing low. We're seeing here that momentum here, really just not coming in here with the 200 EMA, just having that overall factor of just that downside there, with earnings coming up on, what is this? After the market, the 20th, so tomorrow they're coming out with some earnings. The overall markdown, I think Kohl's didn't do very well, so this is kind of dragging it down as well. Looking for it to potentially to the upside, we need to start breaking above that 200 EMA, which is around 95 to 97. Downside support you can kind of see here around the $90 price target. If it was I think the bad news is already somewhat out, but we could see some further bad news to come down to basically the 84 to 82. Starbucks, get your hot cup of joe. That being said here, this thing has been consolidating for quite some time here. Same kind of pattern with like Ross that we just looked at, with the 200 EMA really being a strong component here, and the $80 price target, which is the 618. Really just not having the conviction to kind of see this kind of start trading higher. I actually want to adjust this just slightly here, because there we go. Yeah, so it's around the $80 is basically still the overhead sign of resistance. Downside is really going to come around 74, 75. Again, with earnings out of the way, some of those pitfalls are out. But again, this is completely tied to the overall economy and how things do open back up if folks decide to. SGEN, again, not familiar with this company as well. This thing looks like an interesting pattern. We do have the 5 and 8 crossing through the 21, trying to build a base here, kind of showing some more consolidation, kind of coming down here. Want to see this potentially start building a base here and start seeing the ticks or even the 5 and 8 moving averages cross through the 21. If that base doesn't hold, we could be some potential further downside to around the 140 to 137. Siri XM, this is SIRI, same kind of pattern here. That 200 EMA kind of just keeping it in check here, not getting above that $6 price target, potentially looking for some support if it starts breaking lower to below the $5.76. If you want to see it higher, it needs to get above that 618, which is around $6.15 to kind of see above that 670, but I wouldn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. SNPS, this thing is a nice steady eddy here. With earnings on the horizon, we've previously seen really strong movement in the stock, kind of seen some consolidation here the past 2 weeks, potentially some buying opportunities, really kind of seen some hit and miss movement here. Again, with earnings on the horizon, it'd be very difficult to see how this opens up or closes, but looking for some support around 190 and potential some overhead resistance around the 205. Splunk SPLK, another company that's been doing very well but then got hit with a lot of those other stay-at-home internet play companies, having a huge downward movement, really coming in to kind of consolidate between the 55 and 50 moving averages here, potentially trying to curl up to get that momentum to get a potential earnings run with those 5 and 8 potentially crossing to the 21, looking for that target around 205. With earnings on the horizon, be a little bit difficult, be mindful of that. If earnings go sour, we could be seeing some lower prices come through this as well. Skyworks Solutions, SWKS. This thing has been an interesting one without a doubt. So this is one that we've been looked at multiple times here to kind of see it hold at 21 and 34. This is an excellent example between potential buying opportunities between the 21 and 34. It's sometimes very difficult to buy on down days, but you just got to listen to yourself, right? TCOM, basically TripCom, no idea what this is, probably something to do with trips. Looking for that previous swing high to previous swing low. Basically that 50% retracement been a big old X for them, not being able to get above that, and with the 200 EMA being some strong overhead resistance, basically around $29 to $30. Looking for some downside support, basically around 27. If that doesn't hold, we're looking for a potential low around 25 down to 24.50. T-Mobile, TMUS, another great little stock. Sorry, I need to drink some water. I've been talking for God knows how long. With T-Mobile, with TMUS, huge gap up on earnings, consolidating, great little pattern, potentially looking for some consolidation for then another particular move higher or lower. To the downside, we're really looking for some support around the 110 to 111. To the upside, we could potentially see some price targets well above the 120. Tesla, of course, one that everyone's thinking about. This also having a pretty major split coming out at the end of the month. Looking for some tight consolidation around the $1,900 price target. Would love to see it to the 2,000 without a doubt, being a personal long-term shareholder in Tesla. That being said, really strong downside support around 1,700 and even stronger around 1,580 to the downside. But again, looking for some consolidation around the 1911. That breaks, we're looking for around 1960. Take-Two Interactive, that's TTWO. This one has been, again, another game-making company. Seen some pretty sharp moves previously, but really kind of coming back to the 21.34 for potential buying opportunities, and then just grinding higher from that point on. TXN, Texas Instruments, of course, being in some of the same section within chips and things like that, not chips that you eat. But that being said, hitting an all-time high just today, which is very interesting as well, with the not so great quarter kind of coming down to the 34 and 21 for some consolidation, and seeing that really, I would call it a V-shaped bottom recovery to 140. To kind of see how this pattern plays out, we kind of see that overhead downward side support coming around 137. Let's just call it 134, where the 21 lines up to the overhead. We can kind of see a potential, let's see what the previous swing high to low is. Oh, there we go. Next overhead target be around 147 potentially. Poor Ulta. Ulta has been very lackluster due to the pandemic, getting hit left and right with earnings on the horizon. Be super mindful of that. That 200 EMA has been a significant amount of overhead resistance here, just failing here multiple times. Want to do a quick fib here, like that. Seeing here that 258 really hitting that resistance, and the 50% retracement is coming in around that 200 EMA, so around $233. Basically being a line in the sand that really needs to break above and close to see some potential upside. So we could see some support around 207 with earnings coming out. Anything can happen, to be mindful of that. We could see some, if the earnings goes bad, we could see some support coming around the 200 to even lower to 195. Down to the V's now. We are at VRSK. This thing has been a really nice looking stock, actually. Really performing very well between that 21 and 34 and just continued climbing higher. Being mindful here, this is slowing some potential topping, somewhat of a pattern. If the 5 and 8 start crossing aggressively through the 21 and potentially the 34, that could be a little bit of a negative reversal there. VRSN, this thing has been very much of a box pattern as well, kind of holding that 200 EMA for some support around $200. Potentially, if it wants to break out, it needs to get above that 215 price target. VRTX, again, another pharmaceutical company, so be super mindful of this, that we're seeing this pattern kind of play out with the 5 and 8 crossing through the 21. Again, that's a negative movement, a bearish movement to the downside. Now kind of building a base here with the 5 and 8 kind of curling and starting to slow down, potentially building a base. But now we need to see the ticks and potentially the 5 and 8 cross through the 21 again if it wants to go higher. With the parabolic SAR just on top of the candles here, that could be easier said than done, but looking for some downward support around the 262. Down to the last couple ones. We can look at some fantastic WBN. This is Walgreens. Poor Walgreens has been performing not so great. You can kind of just see this overall chart just trending lower, just taking on water like a sinking ship, looking for, again, really to start breaking some positive signs and some movement to get above $42, $43. Really 5 and 8 crossing through the 21 already, looking for some support around $40. If that breaks, we could go substantially lower. We do have a squeeze set in place here, so we could see some further negative movement there. WDAY, workday, so WDAY, seeing a very interesting chart here. We can kind of draw here the Fibonacci retracements, the swing high to swing low, showing a lot of support here around 181 or 180 to kind of see this potential movement go higher, looking for overhead resistance around 202. So we'll see how that overall plays out, that movement there. Next one is going to be Western Digital, which we talked about, kind of like Intel, and it just went completely terrible. Really consolidating here down, coming in through that movement here. The 5 and 8 continue to start going down here, not really curling here or potentially slowing down at all, or any signs of potentially slowing down. Looking for these potentially start slowing down around $32 price target to kind of see it potentially consolidate and move lower. But with the 21, 5, and 8 really start pointing to the ground, it's still significant, potentially further downside. 3 more left. We have XEL, again, an energy stock. This thing has been very choppy here, very hard pattern to kind of particular trade on this, but we're looking for some support around 70 to 68. If that doesn't hold, we could be coming all the way down to the 50 or even down to the 200 EMA with that movement. If that wants to hold between the 24 and 34, we could see some base building and try to get above that 73. Next we have Xlnx. This thing has been performing somewhat kind of a sporadic as well. This thing is somewhat of a negative pattern here, what we're looking at here. So we're seeing the 5 and 8 already cross through the 21. So if this 34 doesn't hold, so basically if it's coming down to 100, if that doesn't hold, we could see some further downside again, kind of coming into around 95. If it wants to make a V-shaped bottom, it needs to hold this 34, potentially build sideways pattern or a base to kind of start getting above that 110. And last but not least, we have Zoom Communications. This thing has been completely a roller coaster for us as well. Just in the last couple weeks, kind of been consolidating, trading sideways, coming all the way down to the 55 EMA, now making a super strong V-shaped recovery, now kind of potentially kind of looking at an earnings run, potentially to kind of break above that 280, kind of hitting some resistance there with the overall market there, and potentially could see some higher prices or some more consolidation down to around the 256. Again, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you want me to do other indexes and things like that, I would love to do that. It'd be a lot of fun. Again, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. This is Ken from the Dyslexia.